Okay, so imagine way, way in the future, millions of years, a bunch of raccoons are hanging out, checking out what's left of Mount Rushmore.
Oh, wow.
Those giant stone faces totally worn down.
Yeah, I'm sure.
They're probably like, what made this? What could have carved these things? It's a funny thought.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, could we be like those raccoons right now? Looking at the remains of some civilization that was around way before humans.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. You've stumbled onto a concept that scientists have actually explored.
Oh, really?
It's called the Silurian Hypothesis.
The Silurian Hypothesis, like those lizard aliens from Doctor Who.
Exactly.
But scientists don't actually think there was a civilization before humans, do they?
Not exactly. I mean, it's more of a thought experiment.
Okay.
It makes us think outside the box, like what would evidence of a civilization that was millions of years old look like?
Right.
And that has some pretty big implications. Not just for understanding how we humans have impacted the Earth, but also for the search for life on other planets.
So, okay, let's break down this Silurian hypothesis.
Okay.
What are we talking about here when scientists say a civilization that predates humans? What are they actually looking for?
So essentially the question is, could an industrial civilization like ours have existed on Earth before humans?
Right.
And if so, would we be able to detect it?
That's a good question.
It is. The big challenge here is the timescales we're talking about. Take dinosaurs, for example. They were around for over 150 million years.
Wow.
Humans have only been around a tiny fraction of that, like 100,000 years since we started spreading across the globe.
Yeah, that really puts things in perspective.
It does.
Finding traces of a civilization after millions of years, even if they had a similar impact to ours.
Right.
It would be so hard.
It would be like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
That's why the scientists who came up with the Silurian hypothesis, they decided to focus on what they call geological fingerprints.
Geological fingerprints.
Yes, specific markers that a civilization that's long gone might have left behind.
Okay.
And that brings us to the Anthropocene.
The Anthropocene.
The current geological age, which is basically defined by the impact humans have had on the planet.
Right. We're definitely leaving a mark.
We are.
But for how long?
That's the question.
Well, we produce a ton of plastic, right?
We do.
And that takes forever to break down. Wouldn't that be a marker?
You're right on the money. Plastic microparticles could stick around in the environment for ages, potentially becoming part of the geological record.
So they'd be around for millions of years.
It could be.
But would we be able to detect them?
It's possible, but it's not a sure thing.
Okay, so plastic's one possibility. What are some other potential fingerprints we could look for?
Well, one of the most obvious is carbon.
Okay.
We're seeing this huge spike in atmospheric carbon right now.
Right, because of everything we do.
Exactly, because of human activities. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
56 million years ago, there was this period called the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or the PTM for short.
The PTM, what was that?
Imagine the poles were a balmy 70 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
The Earth went through some intense global warming.
Oh, wow.
Carbon levels were way higher.
Sounds familiar.
It does, right?
Yeah.
But there's a big difference.
What's that?
The carbon increase during the PTM happened really slowly over hundreds of thousands of years.
Oh, okay.
What we're seeing now has happened in just 300 years.
That's a huge difference.
It is.
So you're saying that this fast change in carbon, that could be a sign of, like, industrial activity?
It could be, but how would scientists tell the difference between a carbon spike that happened naturally and one that was caused by a civilization?
That's a tough one.
That's the million-dollar question, and that's what the Silurian hypothesis is all about.
Okay.
So imagine you're a scientist millions of years from now, looking at ice cores and layers of rock, To find evidence of a civilization, you'd be looking for these really short and sudden bursts of carbon dioxide.
The Jake spikes.
Exactly. These fast increases, unlike the slower natural changes, could be a sign of something like industrial activity.
So it's almost like we're trying to be detectives.
In a way, yeah.
Looking for clues hidden in the Earth's history.
That's a good way to put it.
But we're not just looking for carbon, are we?
No, you're right.
What other signs could point to a lost civilization?
Well, the Silurian hypothesis considers other markers, too. Things like synthetic molecules, the kind that don't exist in nature. Or even radioactive fallout from something like nuclear testing.
Wow.
The idea is that finding a bunch of these markers together would be stronger evidence than finding just one.
That's like a giant puzzle.
Yeah.
One plastic bottle from millions of years ago might not mean much,
Right.
but a layer of sediment with tons of plastic and a sudden carbon spike that starts to look pretty suspicious.
Exactly. It's all about putting the pieces together, but this is all super complex stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what do you think are the practical applications of the Silurian hypothesis?
Well, besides being totally fascinating,
Right.
it seems like it could really help us understand our impact on the planet. If we can figure out what signs our civilization will leave behind,
Yeah,
we can understand the consequences of our actions better
you got it.
and maybe work towards a more sustainable future.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about understanding the mess we might be leaving behind for future generations.
Or even future species.
Or even future species.
Yeah.
But there's another area where the Silurian hypothesis is relevant.
What's that?
It helps us in the search for life beyond Earth.
Oh, wow.
As we find more and more exoplanets,
Yeah.
we're going to need better ways to find signs of past or present civilizations.
Right.
The Silurian hypothesis gives us a framework for thinking about what those signs might be.
So it's not just about looking back at our own past,
Yeah.
but also looking out into space and thinking about other worlds.
Exactly. It's like searching for ancient civilizations, but on a cosmic scale.
That's amazing.
It is.
It's crazy to think that digging into Earth's history could tell us so much about our future and our place in the universe.
I agree. It's pretty mind-blowing stuff.
You said earlier that a civilization's impact might be harder to detect if they were more sustainable. What did you mean by that?
That's a really great question, and it's one of the most interesting parts of this whole discussion. You see, if a civilization figured out how to be truly sustainable, their impact on the planet might be tiny.
Oh, I see.
They would leave a much smaller footprint on the geological record, making them much harder to find.
So a really advanced civilization might be almost invisible to us.
That's the idea.
But wouldn't that also mean they were much better at living in harmony with their environment?
It could.
I mean, wouldn't that make them more successful?
It's a great question. And does a smaller footprint mean a more successful civilization, or does it just mean they're harder to find? It's something to think about.
That's deep.
It is.
It seems like the Silurian hypothesis isn't just about rethinking the past. It's about the kind of future we want to create.
Exactly.
Like, what kind of legacy do we want to leave behind?
That's the beauty of this thought experiment. It makes us ask some big questions about ourselves, our planet, and where we fit in the grand scheme of things.
We've covered so much in this deep dive already.
Yeah.
This Silurian hypothesis,
Yeah.
these potential signs of ancient civilizations.
Yeah.
We even started thinking about what sustainability really means on a planetary scale.
It's been quite a journey.
I feel like we're just getting started.
Oh, we've only scratched the surface next. We'll take a closer look at the specific markers scientists are looking for
Okay.
and how they try to tell the difference between natural events and the fingerprints of a long-lost civilization.
Can't wait to hear more.
It's going to be fascinating.
So we've talked about these geological fingerprints, but how do scientists actually find them?
Right.
It seems incredibly hard, like searching for a ghost almost.
It's definitely a challenge, but it's not impossible,
Right.
Remember, we're like geological detectives here,
Okay.
and we have some tools to help us. One of the most important is sediment cores.
Sediment cores. Those long tubes of mud and rock they drill up for the ocean floor.
Yeah, exactly.
How do those help us look for lost civilizations?
Well, those cores are like time capsules. They preserve layers of sediment that have built up over millions of years.
Oh, okay.
And by looking at what those layers are made of, their chemical composition, we can look for anything unusual.
Okay, so anomalies, things that seem out of place that might point to an ancient civilization.
Exactly.
Okay, I get that. But what kind of anomalies specifically?
Right.
We've talked about carbon spikes, but what else might they be looking for in those sediment cores?
Well, besides those sudden jumps in carbon dioxide, we might also look for high concentrations of certain metals.
Oh,
Things like platinum gold or even radioactive isotopes.
interesting.
These elements are pretty rare in the Earth's crust, but they can become concentrated through industrial processes.
So you find a layer of sediment with like a crazy amount of gold. That could be a red flag,
It's possible.
like a sign that something weird was going on back then.
It could be, but we always have to think about natural explanations first.
Right, of course.
Volcanic eruptions, for example, can release metals into the environment.
Okay,
That's why it's so important to look for several markers happening at the same time.
got it. So a carbon spike, plus a bunch of gold in the sediment.
Yeah.
That would be way more significant than just one or the other.
Exactly. And then there are synthetic molecules to consider.
Okay.
These are molecules that don't occur naturally.
Right.
They can only be created through artificial processes.
So you're talking about like the stuff we make plastics and pesticides with.
Yeah, things like that.
If we found those in really old sediment, that would be pretty strong evidence, right?
It would be very compelling. Yes, finding traces of synthetic molecules in ancient sediment
Yeah.
would strongly suggest that some kind of technological civilization was around to create them.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together like a giant jigsaw puzzle with each bit of evidence adding to the picture.
Yeah, it is like that.
But finding these clues, it seems so daunting. The Earth is a big place.
You're right, it is a massive undertaking, but there are ways to narrow down the search. For example, scientists can focus on areas where geological conditions are good for preserving ancient sediment.
So places like deep ocean trenches or ancient lake beds.
Exactly.
Where those layers of sediment haven't been disturbed for millions of years.
Precisely. Those are great places to look for clues to past civilizations. And the exciting thing is that with advances in technology, we're getting much better at analyzing those sediments in incredible detail.
It sounds like a long shot. But you're saying finding evidence of a pre-human civilization isn't totally out of the question.
That's right. It's really a testament to the power of science and human curiosity. We're always pushing the limits of what we know and what we can discover.
I like that.
And who knows, maybe one day we'll stumble on something really groundbreaking, something that totally changes our understanding of Earth's history and our place in the universe.
That's exciting to think about. But even if we did find all those markers, the carbon spikes, the gold, the synthetic molecules, would there still be people who didn't believe it?
Oh, of course.
People who would say it's all natural, no matter how convincing the evidence seemed.
Absolutely. You're right. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Yeah.
And even then, there will always be those who doubt.
Wow.
But that's part of the beauty of science. It's about presenting the evidence, making the case, and letting the data speak for itself.
Right. And ultimately, the truth, whatever it is, will come out.
Exactly.
It's about being open-minded, following the evidence, and being ready to be surprised.
I agree.
We've talked a lot about looking for ancient civilizations here on Earth.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, how does the Silurian hypothesis apply to the search for extraterrestrial life?
Right.
Could we use these same principles to search for civilizations on other planets?
That's an excellent question, and it takes this whole concept to a whole other level.
Yeah.
The same principles we've been talking about, looking for these markers in the geological record, can actually be used to search for life beyond Earth.
Oh, wow.
You know, if a technologically advanced civilization existed on another planet, it's likely they would have left some kind of impact on their environment too.
So we could potentially detect alien civilizations.
We could.
By looking for those same kinds of markers.
Yeah.
But instead of looking at sediment cores,
Okay.
we'd be studying the atmospheres or the surfaces of other planets.
Exactly. We could look for unusual things in the atmosphere.
Okay.
Stuff that doesn't fit with what we know about natural processes.
Like what?
Well, for example, high levels of industrial pollutants.
Oh, wow.
Or we could even look for signs of huge engineering projects.
Okay.
Like planet-sized solar energy collectors.
That's mind-blowing. It's like taking the Silurian hypothesis and blasting it off into space.
Yeah.
Instead of digging for ruins on Mars. We could be looking at the atmosphere of a distant planet, searching for tiny clues that point to civilization.
You got it. And that's what makes the Silurian hypothesis so powerful. It's not just about looking back at our past. It's about looking outward and considering the huge possibilities of life beyond Earth.
It's really humbling when you think about it.
It is.
The vastness of time and space and the idea that other civilizations might have risen and fallen long before us.
Yeah, it really puts things in perspective.
I agree. It's a good reminder that we're just a small part of a much bigger story, a story that's still being written.
Absolutely. And who knows what amazing discoveries are waiting for us.
The possibilities are endless. But before we get too lost in space,
Right.
I want to bring us back down to Earth for a second.
Okay.
We've talked about these potential signs of ancient civilizations.
Yeah.
But we haven't really talked about what might have caused their demise.
Right.
Like, why might these civilizations have disappeared?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
And unfortunately, it's one we can only speculate about.
Okay, well, let's speculate then. What are some of the possibilities?
One big concern is environmental damage.
Okay.
just like we're dealing with climate change now.
Right.
Ancient civilizations might have collapsed because of practices that wrecked their environment or used up all their resources.
That's a scary thought. It makes you think.
It does.
It's a reminder that even the most advanced civilizations aren't immune to the laws of nature.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's always the chance of huge catastrophic events. Things like asteroid impacts, massive volcanic eruptions, or even pandemics.
Right.
These events could wipe out entire civilizations, leaving behind only those faint traces in the geological record.
So we're like trying to piece together a cosmic crime scene?
In a way, yeah.
Looking for clues to a mystery that happened millions of years ago.
I like that analogy.
And with any good mystery, there are bound to be some twists and turns.
You're right. That's what makes this whole search so fascinating. But I'd like to shift gears a little bit and dig deeper into something you mentioned earlier, the idea that civilizations could collapse because of unsustainable practices.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's something that's especially relevant to us today as we face challenges like climate change and running out of resources.
I agree. It's very relevant, even if the Silurian hypothesis is just a thought experiment.
Yeah.
Could it give us some insights into where our own civilization is headed?
Absolutely, by exploring what could happen when civilizations aren't sustainable, even in a hypothetical sense.
Right.
We can better understand the risks we face
Okay.
and the choices we need to make. It's like holding a mirror up to our own civilization and asking ourselves some tough questions about how we're impacting the planet.
That's a powerful image. It's about learning from the past, both the real past and the imagined past.
Yeah.
So we can create a better future.
Exactly.
But is a truly sustainable civilization even possible?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, every species uses resources and creates waste. It's just the nature of life.
Yeah.
Haven't we already proven that real sustainability is just an illusion?
That's a great question. And it gets to the heart of what sustainability really means. It's not about having zero impact. It's about minimizing our impact.
Right.
And making sure we don't use up resources faster than they can replenish themselves.
So it's about finding a balance between our needs and the needs of the planet.
Yes, exactly.
But we haven't really figured that out yet, have we?
You're right. We still have a long way to go to achieve true sustainability.
Okay.
But there are examples in nature that give us a glimpse of what might be possible.
Oh, really? Like what?
Take a forest ecosystem, for example.
A forest? How does a forest show us sustainability?
Well, in a healthy forest, resources are constantly being recycled.
Okay.
Waste gets broken down and reused.
Uh-huh.
And the whole system stays balanced for centuries, even millennia.
Wow.
It's a closed loop.
So you're saying nature itself provides a blueprint for sustainability?
That's a beautiful way to put it.
It's like we need to become more like a forest, finding ways to live in harmony with our environment instead of exploiting it.
Exactly. It's about changing our perspective from one of dominance to one of interdependence.
I like that.
It's about realizing that we're part of a big, complex ecosystem.
Right.
And that our actions have consequences. It's about making choices that prioritize the long-term well-being over short-term gains.
This has been a really thought-provoking conversation.
It has.
We've explored the Silurian hypothesis, dug into those potential signs of ancient civilizations, and even thought about what sustainability really means on a planetary scale.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
So what's next? Where do we go from here?
Well, so far we've mainly focused on the evidence for the Silurian hypothesis.
Okay.
And how we could search for similar signs on other planets.
Right.
But like any scientific idea, there are also counterarguments.
Okay.
Next, we'll take a look at some of the criticisms of the Silurian hypothesis.
Okay.
And why some scientists aren't convinced.
That sounds interesting. I can't wait to hear what they have to say. So we've spent the last two parts of this deep dive really going deep on this Silurian hypothesis.
Yeah.
You've talked about those geological fingerprints,
Yeah.
the search for ancient civilizations here on Earth, and even how those ideas could apply to the search for life on other planets.
It's been quite a journey.
It's been a wild ride, but let's be real. This whole idea of a pre-human civilization,
Yeah.
it's pretty out there, isn't it?
It definitely pushes the boundaries of conventional thinking.
Yeah.
And like any bold new idea, it's gotten its share of criticism.
Right.
But that's a good thing. It's a healthy part of how science works.
It's how we refine our understanding, right?
Yeah.
So let's hear what the skeptics have to say. What are some of the main criticisms of the Silurian hypothesis?
Well, one of the biggest criticisms is the lack of direct evidence, you know?
Okay.
We haven't found any fossilized iPhones or ancient microchips buried in the ground.
Right.
For some people, that's enough to dismiss the whole idea.
I can see that it would be pretty hard to argue with a fossilized robot dinosaur.
Right.
But what about those less obvious signs we talked about?
Yeah.
Like the spikes in carbon levels or those synthetic molecules. Do the skeptics have explanations for those?
They do, for example, when it comes to those sudden increases in carbon.
Yeah.
Critics point out that we still don't fully understand everything that can affect carbon levels over really long periods.
Okay.
There might be natural processes that we haven't discovered yet that could explain those spikes without needing to bring in an ancient civilization.
So it's kind of like saying just because we haven't found proof doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Exactly. Absence of evidence is an evidence of absence.
Right.
Critics argue that we might just be missing the evidence or interpreting it wrong.
Okay.
It's a valid point. We have to be careful not to get so excited about a new idea that we ignore other possibilities.
It's a good reminder to stay grounded. Approach these things with a healthy dose of skepticism and critical thinking. Are there any other big criticisms?
Yeah, another one has to do with how long evidence can actually last.
Okay.
Think about all the crazy geological stuff that happens over millions of years.
Right.
Mountains forming and eroding continents, moving oceans appearing and disappearing.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine anything surviving all that.
It is. It makes you wonder how much evidence has just been wiped out by time.
Right, and even if some traces did survive,
Yeah.
how would we even know what to look for?
That's the issue of detectability. Our tools for studying the geological record are getting better all the time. But we're still limited in how far back we can look.
Okay.
It's like trying to read a book that's been buried in mud for millions of years.
Oh.
Some pages might be okay,
Yeah.
but we might not even realize they're writing, let alone understand the language.
That's a great analogy. It really shows how hard this search is.
It does.
It takes more than just good science.
Yeah.
It takes imagination and open-mindedness.
You're absolutely right. But that's also what makes the Silurian hypothesis so fascinating.
Yeah.
It forces us to think about the limits of our knowledge and how much we don't know.
So where does all of this leave us? We've explored the Silurian hypothesis.
We have.
We've looked at the evidence and considered the criticisms. What are your final thoughts?
I think even if we never prove it for sure, the Silurian hypothesis is a really valuable thought experiment.
Okay.
It reminds us that we shouldn't assume we're the only intelligent species to have lived on this planet, or any planet for that matter.
It's a humbling thought, and even if we never find absolute proof of a pre-human civilization, just asking the question, searching for answers,
right,
it pushes us to create new technologies, to understand Earth better and even to think more broadly about the possibility of life in the universe.
I agree.
It's amazing how one hypothesis can lead to so much scientific research and inspire us to think beyond what we currently understand about the world. So what's the takeaway message for our listeners today?
I'd say stay curious, keep asking questions, and never underestimate the power of imagination.
Okay.
The universe is full of mysteries, and we've only just begun to explore them.
Well said. This has been a really incredible deep dive into the Silurian hypothesis.
It has.
We examined the evidence, we considered the criticisms, and we explored the bigger implications of this really thought-provoking idea.
Absolutely.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. If a civilization did exist millions of years ago, and if they were so good at sustainability that they left no trace, would that be the ultimate success? Or would it mean they'd be invisible to us, forever lost to the depths of time? It's something to think about. Until next time, keep exploring.